texted Stooch.
Stooch? Okay.
I also texted Stooch. He will be joining soon.
All right, guys. So we're up and we are live and it is streaming now. I apologize to everyone watching the video on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, as whatever the internet gods will allow, because technology was giving us difficulties. We've got it resolved, and I think for the patience of the students over at Rutgers University, Gabriel, this is your show. Please start on up.
Thank you. So today we'll have Michael Vass, an expert on gun control and red flag laws, speak about how red flag laws are immoral and how their implementation has led to a multitude of negative consequences for communities across America.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I want to welcome everybody there over at Rutgers. It's great to be back with you guys. I was hoping that I would be able, if it weren't for COVID, I'd be there on campus again. Last time I was on campus was about 1990. When I left the school, I got there in 1986. And it's a beautiful campus. You know, the dorms right on the Raritan, the three towers, I was in the middle one on the 6th floor. And
I was on Campbell Hall, the one like farthest from like the center of New Brunswick.
Yep. And so
love those river dorms.
Oh, they are the best. And we had all kinds of trouble that I beg of you, don't do anything we did because we were just really bad. A different world, though. But it is good to be back with Rutgers University. So let me mention that I like to do, whenever I speak, and I do speak on these kind of subjects quite a bit. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. And I do like interactivity. I'm going to go through the little bit of the speech first, and then we're going to open it up to all your questions. I hope you have a lot of questions. I know it's an issue that a lot of people have not heard a lot about, and there are some very specific reasons for that. But to let me get started, let me first state that this is not meant to be a definitive legal finding or analysis. What this is meant to start a discussion and spark understanding in what is proposed, intended, and the consequences of red flag laws. Starting from the most recent point, let's start and understand the issue at hand. Red flag laws are also known as ERPOs, or also known as Extreme Risk Protection Orders. Any of those names all mean the same thing. And they are part of a larger issue that's now being called the, quote, common sense gun control policy. But what does that really mean? In March 27th, 2021, New York Times opinion article columnist Frank Bruni noted in the affirmation, quote, gun control is probably the most instantly and widely recognized shorthand for the debate over such laws, and journalism depends on verbal economy. I don't think gun control is the main thing standing in the way of additional measures to protect Americans from gun violence and to diminish the number and near instant availability of guns in a country crazily saturated with them. How we write and talk about any issue that engenders passionate disagreement is, end quote. Now, we can all agree that words are powerful. And by the way, all of this speech is going to be provided to you at mvass.com. It's going to be available at 9:30 p.m. this evening, including all links to sources that I am mentioning. So you'll have a chance to review it later if you wish. But what's even more powerful than words is the meaning of the words, or to be more exact, the commonly understood meanings of words and phrases, which may not be the same thing. So what does the Second Amendment mean? Some would say it refers to the right to hunt, or for the state-approved civilian military ownership, which essentially means the National Guard. Most would say that it allows for American citizens to own non-military firearms, and in some cases military-class firearms, to provide for self-defense from ne'er-do-wells and potentially a government gone rogue. That general meaning is supported by the Supreme Court decision of District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, and now disputed by the Ninth Circuit Court decision in Young versus Hawaii. And it is not absolute, but very wide-reaching. Coupled with the National Firearms Act of 1934, a civilian can own a machine gun, an actual weapon of the military, an actual assault weapon, but only with a very special and limited federal license. There are potentially 131,952 licensees as of January 2021 per ATF records, with 726,951 machine guns registered as of April 2020. 39,979 of those are found in New Jersey, 3 times the number in New York State. In fact, New Jersey ranks 5th in the nation for machine gun ownership, outdone only by Georgia, Virginia, Texas, and Florida in that ascending order. Now, that may sound like a lot of machine guns. If we were to ascribe to the theory that assault weapons are a danger to American lives, then obviously this huge number of actual assault weapons would be a leading, if not the leading category of homicides in this nation. In fact, there have been 4 known cases of assault weapons used in crimes since 1934. The most recent was in Madison County, Mississippi in 2019, and in that case, 0 people died. To look at the data even more closely, according to the FBI's Crime in the USA 2019 report, which is the most recent full report we have at this moment, 364 people were killed by all types of rifles. That's in comparison to 1,476 knives and cutting weapons. Yes, knives are 4 times as deadly as the so-called assault weapons, often cited by Joe Biden and other gun control advocates. Now, back to meanings. So far we have defined the most popular understanding of the Second Amendment and its relation to law as well as the real world implications. Brief, but established. What else must be defined to have a coherent discussion? What is an assault weapon? While it's a real term denoting weapons used by organized military forces, its common usage is more in line with what Bruni was hoping for: a mischaracterization and a deception to promote a political agenda. Assault rifle is a term created in the 1980s for the purpose of elevating semi-automatic rifles to a more terror-inspiring level. Coined aptly in the land of make-believe, California, the assault rifle conjures images of Rambo or Schwarzenegger in an action film with an endless supply of ammunition to boot. It conflates the concept of firearms with wanton violence for the roughly 50% of Americans that have little or no experience with actual firearms. This delusionary imagery is compounded by flawed articles by news media. A report from the Daily News in 2016 by Gersh Kuntzman is one example. He said, quote, "It felt like a bazooka to me and sounded like a cannon. The explosions, loud like a bomb, gave me a temporary form of PTSD." He was talking about an AR-15. Or perhaps you heard Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee describe her experience in a bungled mix of sensationalism and pure political hype, whose only connection to reality stopped at the name of the firearm in question. She said, I quote, "I held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I hadn't. It is as heavy as 10 boxes you might be moving, and the bullet that is utilized is a 50 caliber bullet." End quote. This fiction relies entirely on the credibility of the institutions providing this political hype, because it takes about 10 seconds on YouTube to debunk the claims, as there are 10-year-old girls definitively proving these things to be untrue. We addressed this in several video commentaries in the past, but the outright lie persists because news media and elected officials are expected to be authorities and above dishonesty, which is factually inaccurate, especially when they have a political goal in mind. Now, all of this brings us to what is a red flag, ERPO, or Extreme Risk Protection Order law. It is a series of laws based on the 1999 Connecticut creation, and all forms of ERPO laws in the category have these elements in common. A person has a concern about an individual that owns a firearm. That concern is elevated to a warrant to seize property by the government. The victim is not notified and until the moment of seizure itself. Due process does not exist until after the punishment has been enacted. No crime is required or generally assumed. The consequences, such as a loss of reputation, income, lifestyle, and children, are never considered nor have any recourse. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, red flag laws currently exist in some form in 19 states and Washington, D.C. And all of them contain these exact elements. The bill is in the Senate under S-292 by Senator Marco Rubio, and it contains these elements. Red flag laws violate the 2nd, the 4th, the 5th, the 10th, and the 14th Amendments, as well as the due process system in our judicial system. And we've covered this extensively in August 2018 in a report we submitted to the members of the New York State Assembly and to the New York State Legislature, the Senate, and prior to the passage of the red flag legislation in New York State. That 8,000-word report is based on 6 months of interviews, research, FOIA requests, and over 150 qualified sources, including the only 2 studies that have been done on red flag laws to this date. The result is that in New Jersey there have been more than 200 ERPO, or Extreme Risk Protection Order, actions in the first 5 months alone. New York has had at least 624 red flag actions in its first year as of November 2020. At least one of those red flag actions caused the death by suicide of one of the victims here in New York. And New York, like every state thus far, does not keep or report on how many families and children have been impacted by this law. Not one governmental organization in any state or any elected official has responded to my official request to begin counting since we've made our repeated requests in 2018, 3 years ago. But specifically, we're talking about New Jersey today. So what does the Extreme Risk Protective Order Act of 2018 actually say? As submitted by New Jersey Assemblyman John McKinnon and co-sponsored by Assemblyman Benson in 2018, the original bill was Bill number 1217. And it states, any person may submit an application to the court, and that was changed in the final law. The judge may examine under oath any person seeking the order and any witnesses the person produces. The judge shall consider a recent threat or act of violence by the person, the history of threatened use of physical force, evidence of a recent or ongoing abuse of alcohol by the person, evidence of recent acquisition of other deadly weapons. These are all critical things that I'm going to go over with you in a second to let you understand how broad this really is. In lieu of the required written affidavit making this charge about the red flag action, the judge may take an oral statement under oath. That too was changed in the final law slightly. A gun violence restraining order shall include stating that the person is entitled to submit one written request for a hearing. And if the person violates subsection B of this law, the person is committing a crime in the fourth degree and includes being prohibited to be able to control a firearm. These are all really important things. I want you to understand the consequences of what this is all talking about, because it may sound like gobbledygook. It may not have an impact. I want to explain what we're talking about here. Now, there's much more, and there are some minor changes to the final law, as I mentioned, but let's consider what has been stated. Absolutely anyone, including a troll on social media, that despises your personal preferences on a piece of entertainment that they love, a movie that they saw, a song that they heard, can file an ERPO in many states. New Jersey did just that to any family member and anyone who's been in your household. That means anyone who's currently or in the past been a member of your household and law enforcement in general. In New York State, it would include teachers, even a temporary badminton coach at a school. The internet is still part of the admissible evidence and or witnesses, which means your tweets, your texts, your Facebook posts, your Instagram posts, your pictures all count against you. Now, that troll can provide witnesses, and they can all make their cases orally. There is no required check on the background of the accuser, nor any of the witnesses that they provide. And this will all be done without ever telling you that this is happening or allow you to defend yourself. So they have an unlimited source of individuals that they can pull from. You're never going to know about it. And these all may be people who have a problem with you or your opinion, say like on Star Wars, whether you think Rey is great or not, which a lot of people had an argument about. Now, this argument you had with the troll, and perhaps you even had this problem in person, maybe they know you, maybe they're part of a club or a group that you're in, is part of the evidence that's being used against you, especially if you happen to suggest that you might... if you happen to do what, like LL Cool J, back in the day, he had a song referencing Mama Said Knock You Out. And if you happen to do that, well, you just made a problem for yourself. If you happen to buy a hammer, nails, a cooking knife, golf clubs, a baseball bat, any of these items, or pretty much anything, a brick, in the last 6 months, it could be a little bit longer, believe it or not, that's also used against you, because that's proof that you just had violent intent. Because every one of those items, a chair, a golf club, a cooking knife, a hammer, they're all violent weapons that have been used to commit murder. Therefore, they are dangerous weapons as defined by New Jersey. If after the argument with the troll, you go out with your friends, and let's say it's a Friday, you've just finished up with your schoolwork or you're done with your job, and you have 4 beers, just 4 beers, guess what? You're now an alcoholic. Worse, if you had 1 shot during that time and you had that, that's even worse for you. And it's massively worse if you've ever had mixed drinks in those 4 hours instead of beers. This is solidifying that you are an alcoholic, which again, according to New Jersey and in general, these are things that are being used against you to verify that you are dangerous to yourself and others. And it's insanely worse if they can show that you've gone out on a Friday and had 4 beers or other drinks ever before. So the first time you do it, that's all it needs. And by the way, your Instagram is being used against you. Your Facebook and Twitter are being used against you to prove that you are, by definition, an alcoholic and are a repeat offender. Now, since you've proven how dangerous you are, and there is no one in this process who is defending you, no one is standing there saying, well, no, that's just a regular Friday. No, they were just going out to play golf. No, they just had an argument about a movie. No one is there to protect you. No one is there to say that you are a good person. The judge is going to decide and err in the side of caution. And they're going to do that because they don't want to get blamed for the next mass shooting that may possibly happen, because they have a political career to consider. So you're going to get notified normally somewhere between 5 and 8 a.m. in the morning by a SWAT team that's going to be banging on your door. Now, I hope that you're not waking up with a hangover, nor should you jump up and think that someone is trying to break into your house. Because God forbid if you did that, that has led to someone's death already in a red flag action. And that's when you're going to be told, at that moment is when you're going to be told that they're coming in, they're going to search your house, they're going to take your property, and anyone else's firearm that may be in that household. And you don't get to do anything about it. What they will do is tell you that, oh, and here's the form you need to go and set up a time to go into court to say that you're actually innocent of what we just did to you. And that's assuming that you can afford a lawyer and the time off from work to actually go in and get this done. Now, mind you, even if you do go in to court, you get a date set up, remember that in the meantime, all of the local media is now reporting exactly what just happened. That you've been, and that means you're going to be barred from schools, you're going to be barred from anywhere that children may be or could possibly be going to. You could be fired from your job, or your business, if you own it, could suffer because it's getting the negative publicity. And we've seen this actually happen real world. This actually does happen. Plus, the troll, the person who started this whole process, is now online and has a legion of followers who are absolutely guaranteed they suddenly believe that you are an evil terrorist, and you must be because the police brought a SWAT team to bust down your door and take your property. Sounds pretty bad. It ain't over. It gets worse. Because I'm going to add two things to this not quite fictional example here, because it's not really fictional. It's happened to people. If you have kids, they must be removed from that home. I want to be very clear on this. This is an absolute direct consequence of every red flag law in every single state, and if it would be passed nationally, would happen nationally as well. And it's very simple. If in every state, children must be taken out of any household that presents a real danger to those children. If they are at risk, they have to be taken out of that household. You just had the government deny you your constitutional rights, and they did that under the guise of you being a danger to yourself and or others. That means those kids are in danger. They must be taken by the state. So you're going to be fighting to get your kids back, as well as your property. As the media tells everyone that you just lost your kids and your property because you are a dangerous person. And let's keep going because it gets a little bit worse. Now imagine that you may be a woman, and let's say that you're attacked by a man who on average is about 6 inches taller, weighs maybe 40 pounds more than you do, and you're going to fight that person off. Good for you. Now let's say that attacker, for some reason, maybe it's someone part of that online legion of people who saw that you are some kind of dangerous person. They see you at school, they see you at work, or going to the movies, or going to some public place, and they think, oh my God, you're a dangerous terrorist. You're here to kill everyone. They're going to come up and confront you. And since they know that you've been armed in the past, that's why the police came and took your firearms, they happen to be armed, legally or otherwise. And they're confronting you. Now imagine in that situation that, okay, you get into a scuffle and you, luckily, good for you, you overpower this individual and you take control of that firearm to save your life, to keep this person under control. Guess what? You just broke the law again. Remember I mentioned Section B of the law? You now control a firearm. That is a direct violation of the law, and you are now going to be arrested for defending yourself. Sounds insane. This all sounds crazy. But if you don't believe me, please go and look at the law. As I said, at mvass.com, I have the link to the law itself in its current form. You can read it for yourself and see it's all right there. This is consequences of it. And there are more. I'm just limiting it for time. And these are consequences that are existing in every single red flag law in every state and in the nation as proposed. There is zero consequences, by the way, for anyone who misunderstands what's going on, that they made a mistake. Because if someone says, oh, well, they aren't a danger, if it is proven after the fact, well, that was a mistake. You don't get to do anything about it. You don't get to sue. You don't get to have any damages. It just, okay, eventually we'll give you back your firearms. You can go into the courts and try and get your kids back. Hope the social media wasn't too bad. Hope you didn't lose your job. Hopefully your neighbors didn't label you as some kind of terrorist freak. I hope you're going to be all right. Go on about your life. Thank you very much for participating in this process. That's your recourse in every law. Now, as I said, these aren't the worst parts of the New Jersey or any extreme risk protection order. This in no way, by the way, everything I've just described to you, this in no way stops a criminal from illegally obtaining a firearm in the first place. It in no way stops a person who has criminal intent or mental instability from committing a violent crime. And they can, and remember, these are people who can use, and we've seen, they have used cars, knives. We've seen it in DC on April 2nd of 2021, where a maniac didn't use a knife, he didn't use a gun, he drove his car and killed an officer in Washington, DC. So this law isn't stopping crazy people or those with criminal intent to cause harm. All this is doing, as you can see, is punishing you for exercising your Second Amendment rights. That should be very troubling. I can tell you this as well, because I know President Joe Biden had said a lot of things about ERPOs and red flag laws, and he made you think that, well, this is going to help you somehow, even dealing with people who are committing suicide. And I can tell you that in 3 years of doing research, following this up, talking to various states about this, there is zero evidence. There is no study. There is no report. There is nothing that actually shows that red flag laws stop or reduce violence or suicides. There is no evidence. By the way, if there was, Joe Biden, Jen Psaki, the Biden administration, somebody would have cited that report. It doesn't exist. Someone would have cited that study. It doesn't exist. I've read the studies that do exist. It is no evidence. I've read the FBI reports on crime data. There is nothing that shows any proof. And that's true of any of the 19 states and in DC. So let me add this up. No matter how you want to look at this, red flags are a great slogan, and they use these slogans of protecting you from those who are criminally insane and those who are criminal with intent to protect you. And they tell you that they're going to take care of mental illnesses and people who have suicidal tendencies. But that's all they are. They're slogans. They're ideas that allow them to pass these laws state after state, abusing and using your emotions to get passed. They do violate due process. You've heard me mention it several times. You're not being notified. You don't find out about this until after the fact. You have no protection. No one is there to protect you. So there isn't, and remember, there's, in this entire process, in every example, there is no crime. It doesn't even have to be suggested that there could be a crime. It's just about punishment. And any attempt to provide a semblance of due process, again, only happens after the fact. And these consequences that are happening to you in the meantime, they're irreversible. You're never going to get back your social media accounts and get back the impression, the reputation that you had before. You may not get that job back. You may never get your business back. You may never get your property or your children back. And the damage that's done to all of those may never be able to be stopped. So ERPOs do violate the Declaration of Independence and the amendments, from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to the 14th Amendment, Section 1, which states, quote, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws." But let's speculate. As nothing prior that I've been saying is speculation. It's all derived from the actual laws and data as it has been available to this moment. The one thing that is provided by extreme risk protection orders is power. The power to attack with the full force of the government anyone that is labeled as undesirable. The potential for abuse is both through ignorance and through active will is rampant. It is inconceivable and improbable and factually incorrect that in the tens of thousands of actions since 1999, that there has not been even one case of abuse of these laws. And in fact, there is cases of abuse of these laws. And there is no punitive damage against someone who does abuse these laws. Which leaves me with this final thought, and then I'm going to be opening it up for comments. I want to go to the Blackstone Ratio. You may or may not have heard of this before, but it says, quote, "Better than 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent suffer." If that's too ancient and British, then there's, of course, Benjamin Franklin, who says it is better that 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer. And if that's too old for anyone, how about this? There's the reappropriated BLM rally call, originally from Malcolm X. You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace until he has freedom. Extreme risk protection orders and ERPOs and red flags, or whatever you want to call it, do not create more peace. They do not provide more safety. They do not capture or impede the guilty. They never have, nor are they designed to do that. Instead, they will and do make innocents suffer and remove freedom. Mass shootings and gun violence are a problem. This is nowhere near the answer. Let's go to your questions. There should be a few.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
What do you think the chances are of courts shooting down red flag laws as constitutional?
That would have to go to, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. It's already being sued in several different states. That process can take 7 to 10 years on average. And it depends. Now, I mentioned earlier, there was about 3 weeks ago, the Ninth Circuit Court just shot down the Second Amendment. They just decided that you don't have a right to defend yourself from the moment you leave your house until you get back into it. That's with concealed carry, open carry. They literally have said, and this is the first time that it's ever been said by any judicial system, that you don't have a right to protect yourself. So if we're talking about those individuals in a move where we're going to see the packing of the courts, of the Supreme Court, which is now being debated and evaluated, which means it's going to go through. If you see those members of that Ninth Court that are willing to say that you don't have a right to protect yourself outside your home, and they get on the Supreme Court and they're put on in enough numbers to outweigh the conservatives or anyone else, then no, this will never get repealed. This is very possibly something that will permanently affect your life, that you will never have due process again in this regard. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And next would be Jordan, since he has his hand raised. Actually, it might make more sense for the rest of you who have questions to raise your hand, so please do that as well.
Hello, sir. I just had a question. I wonder if you have any data. You mentioned that most red flag laws allow law enforcement to be the initiator. I'm assuming, like, my gut says that that's the vast majority of them. I was just wondering if you had any data on that, what your thoughts are on the fact that they can now unilaterally take your property and they don't even know you.
I don't have, and I do not recall that anyone has done a study, or again, there's almost no data about red flag laws that have been actually done about red flag laws. There's only two reports, studies that have been done, one at the Duke University, one at the University of Indiana. And they were addressing consequences of who is being affected and also whether or not suicides actually happen. So no one actually has the data that you're speaking about. It is understood that it's about 50-50, where you have, depending on the state, like I said, in New York State, teachers are individuals who can initiate a red flag law. In some states, it could be friends and family members or others outside of that group, people like your coworkers. In New Jersey, it's very specifically anyone who's ever lived in your household at any time. And the definition of who can be in your household, by the way, it seems like, and I don't want to say it absolutely is, but that means that if, say, for Thanksgiving, you go over to your house or your friend or family member's house and you have an argument with someone there because you're watching football, you had a couple of drinks, and you got into a big argument about that, they threatened that they would hurt you. You know they are a gun owner. Because you were in that household throughout that day, it is possible that the court can interpret that as, well, you are a member of that household, even though it was temporary, and therefore you can initiate that ERPO. The law is, that's a problem. The law is so absolutely vague that even that example I'm giving you in several states is absolutely possible, and in most states, and possibly for the national level, quite possible, which should be terrifying for people. And also addressing the fact about police officers, it is absolutely terrifying. Now, whether you like the police or don't like the police, that's an entirely different question. There are a lot of things to consider about that. But imagine that any officer, imagine the abuse that someone could do by either directing an officer and saying, hey, did you see that person just do this? Which gives the officer an exigent cause. He has a probable cause to go and now try and see, well, I was just told by a citizen, let me see what's going on. Hey, that looks weird. Now let me go and get the red flag law action started. Or they are, in many cases, someone else who is either directly or indirectly part of what the law would qualify. They guide them through, literally guide them through the process. In fact, in New Jersey, it's stated that the police will guide you through the exact process to fill out the red flag action forms so that this could go forward. Now, that guidance could take the form of abuse. This is a problem. There are so many levels where abuse can occur and you have no recourse whatsoever. And you don't even know. That's terrifying to me. But thank you. Does that answer that for you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. By the way, just for a quick second, I know, folks, that you're watching and listening to this. I know some of you have some comments. I will address that in a different time. But today I'm just dealing with the questions from the Rutgers students. I want to make sure I get to them and try and give them all our time. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question would be, in your opinion, why do you think the Biden administration is so adamant on enforcing red flag laws, or even not just the Biden administration, the Murphy administration here in New Jersey is so adamant on trying to enforce this that they don't see the contradiction of like the police going into someone's home and getting doing a no-knock raid and causing a lot of Breonna Taylors or and so on and so forth. Yet at the same time, they are very supportive of Black Lives Matter and going against police brutality. It seems like to me it's a huge contradiction in the in the two beliefs of believing in gun control, yet at the same time trying to help out with police brutality.
Well, it's a complicated question because you're now talking about there's a lot of factors in that. Essentially, at the end of the day, all forms of gun control and everything that's being offered about gun control are escalating levels of taking power, of growing the government to become bigger and bigger and to take away more of your power. Thinking of this on a national level, there are 160 to 165 million Americans who own a firearm. It is estimated somewhere between 40 to 55% of Americans own a firearm, 1.2 firearms each, or 393 million firearms. In taking that, imagine that as we see more and more gun control, and we know the ultimate goal. We've heard from former Justice Stevens. We've heard from Beto O'Rourke. We've heard from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They want to take away firearms from American citizens. They have said this multiple times, covered by the furthest left of all news media. All of the major news media have covered them saying this. So that means to be able to take 393 million firearms, or if you're talking about just rifles and other guns, you're talking about tens of millions of rifles as an example, just scaling it down a little bit. Can you imagine the size of government you need to be able to do that? The military force that you would need to be able to do that? Imagine if you just go with the idea of H.R. 127, which is currently in Congress by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, that would require 165 million people to register every single firearm that they have in existence at this moment, 393 million firearms, and have to tell the government where each and every one of those firearms is located. Do you know the kind of manpower it takes to do that? Can you imagine the size of the government it would have to grow to be able to process that information? By the way, this is also including a national registry that has to be created. So that means you're now on a list as someone who potentially has a firearm. Why would a government need to know you have a firearm, where that firearm is, and why do they need to have such a process that gives you no chance to defend yourself to be able to take that away from you? The answers are nefarious, and I'm not trying to be some kind of conspiracy theorist, but we have seen in real time, in real world, the only times that we have seen these kind of ideas move forward is when we've seen a government that is an oppressive government denying people their rights. I use the example of Venezuela. It's one of the most recent ones. We saw in the space of 4 years, Venezuela went from one of the richest countries in the world that are free, and the people had the right to own firearms to some degree, though not like here in the United States. Then they became a socialist state, they lost their wealth, and they also took away all the firearms from the public. And then 2 years after that, the New York Times reported that the Venezuelan government then killed 5,200 of its own people, and the people are now starving on the streets. Again, the process leads to the same place. It's about how fast it gets there. That's my fear. And that's also why we see that the Second Amendment states shall not be infringed, because our founding fathers had that same fear as well. I believe that's my answer to that, without getting into even further away from the subject at hand today, because there is a lot more about this to be talked about. Does that help answer that for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Who's up next? Is it Timothy?
I guess so. I have a couple of questions if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
So it's either a week or two ago, President, if I remember correctly, President Biden announced he was going to announced 6 executive actions in regards to gun control, and I haven't had the time to look into that. So what exactly is? So my first question is, what exactly are in those 6 executive actions that's different, or like whatever's going to change? And my second question is in regards to like the courts, whether it's getting like the emergency protection order, or like trying to get custody of your kids or trying to get custody of your guns back. I'm just curious, is that in process done in front of a judge, or is that done in front of a jury?
Okay. So let me, in Joe Biden's speech and the executive orders that he's put out, I want to first mention this isn't new. Let me make this very clear. Everything you've heard about gun control recently this year is everything that's been said about gun control for the last 40 to 50 years. Every law that they're trying to pass is a variation on a law that already exists. And the only thing that's different today than in the past is the expansion of the growth of government and the power of government over you, and how much less right that you have. Because the same mantra is, and the summation of it is, you need less and less firearms, you have less of a right to the Second Amendment. Joe Biden specifically was focused on 2 major issues, which is one, ghost guns, which are a non-issue. It is a non-existent issue. It sounds terrifying. It scares people. It sounds scary. Ghost gun. What's that? Oh my, must be bad. No, it's not. Ghost guns are guns that you can make at your home, which is, by the way, legal. You can legally make a firearm in your home. You can do that. You can't give it to anyone else. You can't trade it, but you can do that. It is legal. Here's the bigger question. These ghost guns, which would also be any firearm that doesn't have a serial number on it, which many criminals remove the serial number so that firearm can't be traced. That's a ghost gun. It is also a gun that is made from a kit. And when Joe Biden is talking about ghost guns, I want you to understand the scope of the problem he's talking about. It was 2019, the last time it was reported, I believe, by the ATF, that there were 291 ghost guns acquired throughout the entire nation in all of the actions of the ATF. This isn't a problem. We're talking about something that has about 300 firearms in the nation. And they weren't being used. They were just acquired as the ATF was collecting other guns. There is no data, and it is such an insignificant problem, the FBI does not even count that as something, as a category to be counted on. It's not real, but it sounds scary. And then the other major issue he talked about is the ERPOs. And he didn't talk about any of the consequences of it. But as I mentioned, he did say that, well, it's going to make you safer, which there is no data for that. And I can tell you, and it's real simple. Easiest way I can disprove that. Go to the FBI Crime in the USA report for 2019. Or you look at it in 2020 if you want as well. And compare that to 2018, 2017, go back as far as you want. Is there still gun crime that is happening? Yes. Is there violent gun crime that is happening? Yes. Are there mass shootings happening in America and in the states that have red flag laws? Yes. In fact, Colorado, which just had a mass shooting, has a red flag law in place already. Joe Biden seemed to forget that when he was telling the nation you're going to be safer. They have a red flag law. It didn't stop the crazed criminal. Red flag laws don't work. They're inefficient. They're not there to protect you because they don't target the criminal. They target you, the legal law-abiding citizen, 99.994 of all legal gun owners. So that's one of the things. And I want people to check this out because it was 2 years ago that Colorado passed the red flag law. It didn't work. Why is it going to work on a national level? It's the same law. Why is it going to work any differently? Because Joe Biden said it? I mean, come on. Like criminals care about that. The second part of your question, sorry, I kind of lost myself a little bit there. You mentioned, can you say that again? The second part?
So you were talking about like with the courts, with the ERPOs, and
Yeah.
then and with acquiring
With the
like
judges.
getting your custody.
Yeah.
Is it in front of a judge or a jury?
The ERPO process, red flag, extreme risk protection order, does happen in front of a judge. Again, so in the most simple way, person X goes into a police station and they petition the court. There's a form they fill out and say, I think Timothy is a danger to himself and or the public. That will be seen by a judge. The judge will say, okay, can you tell me why you think Timothy is a problem? That person's going to give whatever their reason is. It may be in an affidavit, but usually is given in oral form. They're going to say, okay, do you have any proof? Well, he bought, and in pretty much every state, they have this absolutely generic definition of what is a dangerous weapon. That's your car, a chair, a knife, a baseball bat. It's anything that has ever been used to kill someone ever before. That is a dangerous weapon. Normally the time frame, and it can vary in various states, but normally they go and you could have bought this 6 months ago, and that qualifies. Is there anything else that can make us think that this person is dangerous? So they have this weapon and you have this concern. What else could have happened? Well, I got in an argument with them. They threatened me. These things have happened, whether it's online, in person, ex-wife, ex-girlfriend, ex-lover, they all count. And if they're upset, that's still valid. Even if they're just angry at you, no one checks, no one asks about that. That's not important. Throughout the entire process, you are never defended. There is no one there to say, hang on, let's check this information out. Let's get some more data. Let's protect you. Let's hear from your side. So it is done in front of a judge, and that's where you hear all of the advocates like Joe Biden and others who say, well, this is why extreme risk protection orders are good. This is why red flags are good, because there's due process, because there's a judge and he has to say yes. That's not due process. There is actually 12 steps. There are 12 steps to providing due process in the American justice system. It involves, red flags involve none of them, because you are being punished for a non-crime prior to ever going in and being able to defend yourself. That is not due process. That's retroactive justice. That's retroactive process. It's after the fact. So yes, judges are involved, and in terms of the children, that's handled by the Child Protective Services. When I say that, and I want to be clear, when I say that this is a consequence in every state has a Child Protective Services. In every state, that mandate is to protect that child from dangers in the home. This is an absolute. I have checked with over a dozen lawyers. I've talked to people in multiple states. I've talked to elected officials. I've talked to candidates. I've actually spoken to lawmakers who voted for the red flag laws and presented this question to them. Is it possible the state will take the child if a red flag action happens in that home because CPS is mandated to do so, because that home is now identified as a danger? Their answer in every single case, in every single state, in every part of government I have asked, and every lawyer, is yes. And no one talks about it. No one wants to tell you that. And when you ask the Child Protective Services of every single state, not one of them will tell you any of the data. It is not recorded. It is not needed to be recorded. And no one is willing to even try and give you an estimate. They will not talk about this. It is hands off. It is one of the most firewalled pieces of information in this nation that I've seen in quite some time. You're never going to find out about it. So to say that a judge is involved doesn't make it better. It just makes it different. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So, and then just a final follow-up with that. What about like trying to reobtain your firearms? How is that process done?
Well, that process is a little different in several states. There's two ways that you can receive your weapon back. So in general, these one of the reasons why red flag laws are, quote, legal is because they're considered temporary. They last approximately a year at a time, a year to 18 months, depending on which state you're talking about. And you have usually at least one opportunity to go into court to try and defend yourself. If you get into the court at some point within that year, most states try and do it within 72 days, but it could be within that first year. You go in and you actually do this and try and defend yourself. If it is found in your favor, about half the states have a regulation in there saying that the police must give you back your firearm or its value. Although not every state has that rule. Some states will never give you anything. You just walk out and you can go buy a new gun, but you won't be able to get the one you had before. That there is no process in the law to get you back that firearm. But in many states, they do, but they have a loophole in there where you're not necessarily getting back your firearm because that can be destroyed by many police departments and is sometimes required to be destroyed by various police departments. You'll get its value instead, which is very upsetting. The other way that you get the firearm back, or are supposed to, is at the end of that period. Say the year is up. And here's another part of the red flag laws a lot of people don't talk about. Thank you for bringing this up. It's 1 year. At that moment, in many states, the judge can just automatically reinstate the red flag action for virtually no reason whatsoever. They can just make it happen. That you're just going to extend it for another year. And they can keep doing that ad infinitum. So in that year's time, if you got on Facebook, Twitter, social media, and you were upset about a law that was coming out, a movie that happened, whatever, you got in an argument with someone, and you said anything that could have been considered a threat, if you'd said that in someone's person, live with the person, like the example with Thanksgiving, that red flag law can be continued ad infinitum, year after year after year. That's it. But assuming that that year goes up and it has expired and it has not been renewed, which doesn't happen in my experience, in the data that I've seen, it's almost always renewed, then what happens is you go back to the default of, depending on the state and the exact wording, you're either getting your money or eventually, even in states where they're going to give you back your firearm, it can take 6 months. I've heard people who've gone through this process, it's taken them 6 months to get a firearm back, if at all. Sometimes it's taken a little bit longer because the laws are just inexact and police departments don't have the services to store these things. So it's an inefficient system all the way around. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ava, you're up next. We've been waiting patiently, so thank you for that.
Thank you all for taking time here. I love this. I love answering your questions.
Yeah, first of all, you've been incredibly informative and educated, at least myself. I didn't know much about red flag laws before today, except for the bare minimum. So I appreciate you speaking for us, and thank you for that. Mm-hmm. So my question is that obviously the rationale or the goal mm-hmm. behind red flag laws would be to, prevent somebody who is a legal firearm owner or has no previous violent criminal record and preventing them from getting a firearm, to prevent them from suddenly becoming violent and prevent a violent occurrence from happening. So my question, I guess, becomes, is there any type of alternative to kind of appease that fear, if any, without infringing on our constitutional rights?
That's a really good question, but please excuse me when I say it's based on a bad premise. And let me explain what I mean by that. How do you prevent anyone from doing anything? Can I prevent you from wearing blue jeans tomorrow? I'm being serious. I can't. No one can. To say that we have no way of knowing what a person will do to cause a crime, to take violent action, or when they have a mental breakdown. There's no way to know that. So the law is based on a premise that we can do something that we can't do. You can't predict that. You don't know. It can't even stop people from committing suicide. Based on, I believe it was the Duke University study, maybe Indiana, they found that 60% of the time that someone had the gun removed from them, that person within 9 to 18 months committed suicide anyway through a different means. Another 40% of the people were still questionable and either depressed or seeking treatment. So it doesn't really stop anyone. So when they say that it's there to prevent someone from doing a crime, you can't. If someone wanted to harm you, they'll pick up a rock and they'll hit you with it. They'll drive a car. They use box cutters. I mean, we all remember 9/11. So you can't prevent it, but it's a good excuse. It sounds really good. Now, that's not to say that I believe that there shouldn't be gun control. I think there should be. I think we do have to make sure that violent criminals don't get a firearm. I think those who are mentally unstable, as educated by the law, the courts, should not get a firearm. But we already have a process for that. We already have laws in place. Everything that is being suggested already exists in some form. The only thing that's changing here is the government is gaining more power. We already have rules and regulations to deny those who are legally identified as being mentally unstable from being able to have a firearm. Those who have broken the law with violent crimes, felons, cannot have a firearm legally. We already have these things in place. Domestic abuse, if you have been found to have violent domestic abuse, you're not allowed to get a firearm. So we have things in place. We're not using these laws effectively. We're not implementing the rules and regulations. There are 22,000 gun control laws in America at this time. We have them. We're not implementing all of them properly, and therefore people are getting through the cracks, and a lot of the problems are honestly with mental illness, not with the firearm. The firearm is the end product. It is the last part of the puzzle of this person. And I've said this before about mass shootings. The problem with mass shootings isn't the shooting. The problem is what makes some person decide that their only option in life is to go out and to kill innocent people. If we can answer that problem, if we can address that issue, we will be safer. But saying, oh, but I took away his gun, you didn't take away his root reason for deciding that he needed to go and harm innocent individuals. Therefore, you haven't fixed anything. You just changed the means of delivery of this violence, of this mental instability. And that's something we need to correct. So I think if we're addressing that issue, I think that, and if we're enforcing the laws that exist, as an example, and I'm only using it because it's been in the news lately, Hunter Biden broke a bunch of laws. As an example, he lied on his firearms application. And he disposed, or allowed to be disposed, of his firearm right next to a school with young kids. These are crimes, federal crimes. He should be prosecuted as the example of our government being serious. They're not, which means the government isn't being serious because people are being treated differently. The laws are not being applied equally, which means the laws don't apply at all. And we're not focusing on the root problem. In Hunter Biden's case, at the time, the man was addicted to crack, severely addicted to crack. That is his underlying problem. Deal with that, and he becomes a much more sociable, reasonable, responsible adult. There's one thing to fix. But if we're not addressing that underlying problem, you're never going to be safer. That doesn't mean you should be afraid. Let me say it again. There are 393 million guns in America. 5 million people got guns for the first time last year. We own 46% of all firearms in the world. And you've lived to the age of 18, 19, 20. I'm 53. You know what? We're not dying overnight. The firearms are not deadly. 99.994% of firearm owners in the United States are perfectly law abiding. There are only 14,000 homicides with firearms in the United States. Most of those, approximately 8,000 a year on average, are because of gang violence. There's only 6,000 cases outside of that normally in each year, according to FBI data. So you shouldn't be afraid. You should be aware. You should defend yourself, but you shouldn't be fearful. And our elected officials should be focused on the root cause and determining what that is and fixing that, not trying to punish you because they don't like the way the firearm you own looks. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Oh, we got a lot of people now. I love it. I love it. I do love answering questions. Who's up?
I think it's my turn.
Okay, Zach.
Have there been other countries that have had systems similar to the red flag laws that are being proposed? And if so, like, what have the effects in those other countries been?
No. And that's because most countries in the world, actually all countries in the world, don't have a Second Amendment. We have the most free expression of self-defense in the world. So other countries, in almost all countries, people aren't allowed to have a firearm ever. Now, there's some people, there are anti-gun advocates, anti-Second Amendment advocates out there who want to pose this illusion that if we get rid of the firearms, then you're going to be safe. Nothing will happen. That is a lie. I'll give you a great example. In January 2020, reported by BBC, the BBC News, London had more knife murders than New York City had gun murders. That's not something that is incidental. That happens a lot. They have a huge number of knife attacks. As I mentioned to you earlier when I was going through the speech, in the FBI data, rifles, which seem to be the evil implement of the day, because handguns actually are the thing that actually do most crimes with, but rifles, which are really, really evil, are 1/4 as deadly as knives. And that's true not just this year, it's true every year if you go back into the data and you look at it. We see this on a consistent basis. So to say that not having firearms is going to make you safe is a lie. In the countries that don't have the freedom of firearms, criminals still use firearms. There are still mass shootings. Another misconception that is said, that the United States is the only place in the world that has mass shootings. That is a lie. That is an absolute lie. We, depending on the source that you use, we're somewhere around 56 in the world in terms of mass shootings. In fact, Professor James Allen Fox out of Northeastern University had done a study 4 years ago on the last 40 years of mass shootings in the United States. And the fact is, every year, on average, we have approximately 20 mass shootings per year. About 100 people die in those mass shootings in total every year. That is true every year in the last 40 years, which means 1 year will be up, 1 year will be down. But on average, that is always the trend. That has always been true. It is also true that gun violence overall is down from the 1990s. We are actually safer now than we were in the 1990s, including from mass shootings and school shootings, respectively. The thing that's changed is we have social media and we have a 24-hour news media cycle that can amp this up more to terrify people more, and politicians and other political organizations that can use this for their advantage to get people to do something emotionally that they wouldn't do if they paid attention to the data, which is my conclusion on that. So that's something important to understand. But to say, are there other countries? No, they don't really have red flag laws because they don't really have a Second Amendment, but they still have gun violence they still have mass shootings. Does that answer that for you?
Yeah, thank you. I just I thought that since red flag laws go against the Second Amendment, maybe not having a Second Amendment would mean that you have red flag laws.
No, it means that you have total repression of self-defense.
Yeah.
You have no right to
Gotcha.
self-defense.
Gotcha.
Who's next? Is it Samir, Gabriel, Matthew?
I'll go next.
Okay.
So one argument I've heard against red flag laws
Mhm.
is that since it negatively impacts people with a history of mental health, red flag laws disincentivize people with a mental health history who also own a gun to seek mental health help. So if someone is starting to feel depressed and they happen to own a gun, would you agree with that statement that they often are less likely to seek mental health help because of the fear of getting red flag law?
Absolutely. It's a question that's been asked in many states, and many people have come out and said that, although there isn't an official study on that. Again, there's no real studies on red flag laws, and I believe that's because no one wants to admit they're ineffective. But we do know that in many cases, many times, people who are gun owners won't get medication of any sort because it potentially could flag you to lose your license and your ability to own a firearm. If you are temporarily depressed, if you have an accident, various types of accidents or surgeries could cause you to have to take medication that alters your mental state. And because you have an altered mental state, now you are legally disallowed to be able to effectively own those firearms, and so they're removed from you. And we do know people actively refuse to get treatment because of that. So it is a problem on that end, and it doesn't answer and it doesn't stop the problem where, again, I'm using Hunter Biden as the example because it's very public and it was recent, but it doesn't stop there are other people who just lie and say, oh, do you have a mental instability? No. Well, Hunter Biden said he didn't use crack, even though he had already been arrested for it, as I recall, and he had been in treatment for it already. It's public information, and yet he lied. No one used the system that's there. He passed his background check, so please don't tell me background checks. When people say, oh, background checks work. No, they don't. He passed his background check because he lied and because the system is inefficient, and he got a firearm, even though he legally should not have been able to do so. So it's not I really want to throw out that idea that, well, this is protecting you because it's stopping people who are mentally unstable. It doesn't. And if anything, it may, to some degree, cause more people who are mentally unstable, who are treatably unstable, to not seek treatment. And that's a problem because that creates another potential cause of harm rather than resolve it because they're not looking at this properly. And by the way, just so you all know, I've had these discussions with elected officials in several states. I've had this conversation with different states, and they don't care. Quite honestly, most of the officials, the majority of officials, don't care enough to try and stop this or to change the laws to make them more efficient. They have no interest in it. Does that answer that, though?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. By the way, guys, if I'm not answering your question completely or you think I missed something in that or it raises another question, please hit me with it because I want to make sure I'm giving you information to work with, and I want to make sure I'm answering the questions you're giving. I'm not dodging anything. So go ahead, Matthew. Or is it me?
Yes. We're both twins, so this is Mina. So
okay.
why do you think a lot of Republicans are like willing to defend the Second Amendment, but side with Democrats on red flag laws. For example, like someone like Dan Crenshaw, who supported the red flag laws. I don't know when he did this, but why did they want to support the red flag laws with Democrats?
Well, Dan Crenshaw is one individual. As I mentioned, the bill, and by the way, if you notice, they never like to tell you the bill numbers. They never like to show you where the bill is so you can read it for yourself, which is why if you go to the mvass.com, you will see this speech and you will see the link to the actual bill for New Jersey so that you can read it for yourself and to make sure that I did not misrepresent anything they said. Why are these politicians doing this, though? Why does the news media not tell you the truth, tell you all the information, call out these politicians for sometimes being duplicitous, flip-flopping on it like Kirsten Gillibrand has flip-flopped on gun control? Or why do they back these ideas, Dan Crenshaw, and S-292 in the Senate currently, which is a bill by Marco Rubio, also a Republican? Because it gets them votes. Because it's popular with the news media. Because they're going to get donations from Democrats and Democratic causes to support this. Because they want these bills passed. I wish it was more difficult. And I don't want to discount several of these politicians also believe that without knowing any other consequences, without knowing any other data, when they're being presented this, they believe what's being presented. I can tell you that there are very few people who've written an 8,000-word report on red flags from 1999 to today that goes over some of the consequences I've talked with you today. I can tell you that it is still a shocking bit of information for most politicians when I tell them, hey, and I pose to them the question, does this take away children from families? They look at me and they go, what do you mean? And then when I explain what every state has in terms of their child protective services in each state and how this affects them, they suddenly go, I never knew that. Oh, you didn't know that. Did you know that a man in Oneonta, New York, was accused of a red flag action because he got an argument with a former employee? And in that heated argument, which was between the two of them, they were both going back and forth, he mentioned that he would kill her. He was a known gun owner. She then caused a red flag action against him. This was in 2019. No, it was 2020. And she got the red flag action against him for the man in Oneonta. It destroyed the news media, blasted his business name across central New York's newspapers. He was featured that night and for several nights in the nightly news. He was talked about on, even in my area, which is 2.5 hours away, he was spoken about on my local talk radio station. There's only one. And so he was identified as a problem, a danger. His business was isolated. It was so bad, and his business became so bad, and he was being so persecuted online and in person, he killed himself. In New Jersey, and this one I have to admit, Louder with Crowder, Stephen Crowder brought this up. He did the research on it. Did you know there was a doctor in New Jersey who had a red flag action against him because of someone putting in, it was a Yelp. They were making complaints on Yelp, and so they got a red flag put against them because of that. The abuses are rampant out there, and it's because no one is actually talking about the details of these laws. No one is looking at this and trying to understand and say, hey, here's a scenario. According to this law, because I was at Thanksgiving dinner, someone can take away my firearms. That's crazy. Not because I did something, but because I was at the dinner and there was an argument going on. That these really petty, your ex-wife, your ex-girlfriend, your ex-lover, somebody who's over at your house for 2 days, 3 days, anyone, and again, in New York State, a teacher sees your kid and your kid is tired and has scratched his knee because he was playing baseball over the weekend. But that could be reason enough for a retired, a part-time badminton coach to say, that must be, I know their dad owns a firearm, I am concerned, and they can file a red flag action for that. This is how silly and insane some of these cases are. And that's because politicians have not been made aware of the consequences of their actions. And they don't understand that based on all data that's available, they don't work. So for the ones who actually truly are trying to do something, they are being uninformed and they are being inconsiderate of the consequences of what this is actually doing. And the media is more than happy to go along with that because they support the anti-Second Amendment message, which empowers certain political groups and individuals in the government. That's the conclusion I draw from it. You may draw others, but that's what the data is saying to me. Does that answer that?
Yes, that answers that.
Okay.
Samir, you're up next.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today.
Oh, I'm loving it. I want to do it in person as soon as I can. I really do.
Yeah.
We will next semester because we're all virtual right now, but next semester looks like everything's going to open up, and I would think that we'd be able to have in-person club meetings.
Absolutely. I'll
we
be
would
sure
hope.
to come down as alumni to hear you speak.
I'll be there as well because I'm also graduating.
All right. My question to you is, what is the possibility of the 50-50 Senate right now passing a full assault weapons ban?
If I had to bet money at Vegas for this, 100% it's going to happen. And that's because, let me try and explain this. See, I've been doing this for about 15 years now, talking about political commentary. I cover First Amendment, Second Amendment, international and national politics on a regular basis. And so I'm giving you an answer based on my understanding and following the news, following the trends that we've tended to see. There is very little political will amongst the Democrats in the Senate right now to rebuke the talking heads, the largest voices in the Democratic Party right now. Even though there are many Democrats who are gun owners. We're talking 160 million people in the United States, 165 million. Some of them are Democrats too. And last year, when 5 million new people got firearms, a lot of them were black. And if we go by the trend of the numbers, that would mean roughly some 80% of them may well be Democrats. So we're seeing a large block of people who are Democratic and own this. But the largest voices, which the media makes it seem like are the only voices involved, are pushing for these gun control, Second Amendment denial issues, and there is no feedback that's being made public other than like conversations like this. No one gets to hear any other side. And the only thing you do hear is, oh, well, you don't want to have a red flag law? Well, then you must want people to go out and have mass shootings. You're in favor of mass shootings. You're evil. And then the argument stops right there. You just called me a name, or you're an ist, a phobe, a racist, whatever it may be. And suddenly the conversation is stopped and the news media says, see, we were right. They're evil, evil, evil. So you have to do this. No politician wants to do that. They have to raise money to run for their races. They want to keep the power that they have. They will go through the route of least difficulty. And the least difficult thing they can do is go and say, I'm doing something. Always be afraid when a politician says, I'm doing something, and they haven't told you what it is. Or worse, when they tell you part of what they're doing, but they won't tell you what's the consequence of it. I mean, no one does that anymore. Ask the politician. And then what happens? Okay, you passed this, and then what? Because Colorado passed the red flag laws. It didn't work. So why should we do it nationally? No one's ever asked that question of Biden or anyone else who promotes red flag laws. I would love to hear them answer that, because I haven't heard them answer that. Because the answer is, we don't know, because it doesn't work. So given that there is the path of least resistance is to go with this, to go with the news media message, the political message of I'm protecting you, I'm doing something, which will get them more money, which will get them reelected, they're going to go with it. And the deciding vote will be probably Kamala Harris. And she's already said nationally on TV that she was going to do an executive order no matter what. And she absolutely wants to restrict your gun control, your rights to Second Amendment and self-defense. And by the way, I want to make this very clear. When we're talking about the Second Amendment, we're talking about gun control. The laws that are being put in place, H.R. 8, H.R. 127, S292, red flag laws, these are all targeting Black people and people of color, women, and people who are poor. That's who they're targeting. That's who they're trying to beat up on. They're the people that they do not want to have firearms. They do not want. There was a woman in Florida, and which is why I don't understand why Marco Rubio wants to do red flag laws and gun control. It was 2018. No, 2019, November of 2019, as I recall. A woman was pregnant, 8 months pregnant. Her husband is being pistol whipped by two home invaders who are both armed with pistols, handguns. She has an 11-year-old daughter that those two individuals were threatening to rape. She went into the back of her house. Luckily, she got away from them for a moment, got her AR-15, shot one of them, who then both of them ran out the house. One of them died in a ditch 125 feet away. They want to take away that AR-15 that she used to save her family's life. Her husband, who was being pistol whipped, her daughter, who was being threatened with rape, and she being pregnant 8 months by two individuals that were armed and absolutely intending harmful intent. We have many cases like this throughout the nation. There are somewhere around 500,000 cases of individuals using firearms to protect themselves against crimes, and these often happen in poor areas or against individuals of color or against women who are protecting themselves from rape or other sexual assaults. And these are the people they're targeting. If we want to be honest about this and have an honest conversation, and I am, and I want to hear the arguments, the honest answers are they're trying to hurt those three groups of people, and they're not even honest enough to say that they're going to hurt those three groups. That's a problem. But I do expect they're going to pass this. We're going to see the executive orders come in. Just like the 23 under Obama, it's going to do absolutely nothing. They're going to say, well, that's because we didn't go far enough. And that's going to be the reason why it's going to get right through the House and right through the Senate, because they're going to pass it. It's not going to work because it was never meant to work. And that means they're going to pass even crazier ideas. Does that answer that, Samir?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so Ava, and then I guess Zach will be the last question.
Okay.
All right. So obviously, this entire time we've been talking about how politicians and specifically this administration want to implement these types of laws and red flag laws. But the question is, how do people like us, college students and everyday citizens, push back and get involved against the implementation of these laws and as a people, fight to preserve our Second Amendment rights?
That's a great question, Ava, and I thank you for that. And if you notice, I've tried, for the most part, to be very nonpartisan here. I'm talking about the laws, not the political groups. And I could be naming these political groups. I could be naming many individuals. I'm generally trying to stay away from that for the most part. But because I know there are Democrats. I've had conversations with many Democrats, a couple of liberals, no progressives, in my personal experience, conservatives, libertarians, and many Republicans talking about these issues for 15 years. And the one thing I've noticed is There's not enough blowback against these politicians. We have to let them know, hey, do you understand the consequences of what's going to happen here? And are these groups of people you want to leave undefended to possibly be harmed? Can you explain to me how this is going to actually protect me? Because in all this discussion, you notice none of this is protecting anyone. It's not actually stopping a criminal or someone who's crazed. I have to emphasize that. And why aren't we asking our elected officials, please explain to me how exactly this is going to protect me? Because all evidence at this moment says it doesn't. So one is to hold our elected officials accountable by asking them directly and publicly when they have their town halls to ask them, you seem to support this. Be clear. Do you support it? And then explain to me how this protects me, so that they have to answer this in front of the news media, in front of the public, and take a video of it and put it up on social media, their answer, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, so that people actually have an answer and then they can evaluate that for themselves and to look into further details. Look up the bills. I've just mentioned several today. I gave you a bill for New Jersey, as well as I also link in the article the actual current law, so its original form and its current law. The original form is important to understand because it tells you how far they actually want to go in denying you your rights. So you need to know what that bill says and also to see what the current law says. You need to read these things and say, this is what it's really saying. I'll give you a great example. HR 127 says that for you to be able to you have to get a license before you can even get the right to get a gun. Those guns are regulated in terms of which ones you can and cannot have, and you have to pay $800 a year for insurance on that, on top of also getting a psych eval. By the way, you're a student, maybe you're working. How much time do you have to go get a psych eval? How much time do you have to get with the paperwork? How much money can you afford for a psych eval? Can you afford an extra $800 a year just to have the insurance to have the firearm, plus the cost of actually doing the forms? This is targeting you to make sure you can't use your law. It's another way of saying you can't have this. And we need to call them out. We need to read the bills and say, that's stupid, because everything I just mentioned doesn't stop a crazy person or someone who is mentally unstable or someone who has a criminal intent. That's not stopping them. None of those things I just mentioned stops a single criminal ever. So why are we looking at passing this law? And that's HR 127 to be exact, by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. That makes no sense. Yet people are telling me we have to do that. Because people are saying we have to do something. That's the third thing. So 1, confront the elected officials, get an answer. 2, know the law itself, read it. 3, we have to go out there and we have to make sure that we don't accept this. Do something. Stop saying that to politicians. I don't care what it's about. Don't say do something. Tell them to do this. Give them an idea, not do something. Because when you say do something, they will do whatever is really easy and going to get them votes that may hurt you in the long term, because they don't care. They're counting on the fact that you're not going to remember this in 3 months. So that when they go and ask you for a donation, they'll say, hey, I did something. Don't worry about whether it actually worked or not. That's not important. I did something, so give me money. No, I want to say, do the right thing. I don't want you to do something. I want you to do something that actually works, something that helps people long term, that answers the problem. And then maybe I'll vote for you. Maybe then I'll donate towards you, but not a second before that. We have to do all of those things. And again, make it public. Let people see it. You know, I've been doing this 15 years. I've been on news stations regularly, especially about the Second Amendment. I've been at many events talking about this, and it still doesn't get enough traction. I tried to reach out to my state legislature. I provided them the documentation and all the information. I've had the interviews with them. But one person isn't enough. It's taking this information and saying, you know what, someone's actually talking about it. Let me push that forward. Let me share this with other people. Maybe I should, not only just retweet it or repost it on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Maybe I should do a Snapchat on it. Maybe I should actually just say, this is what I think. Here's my suggestion of a great idea. I think this is the most important thing, and that's why I love talking to college students. You guys are brilliant. You are the next generation. You have new, fresh ideas. You're thinking in ways that I, as a 53-year-old man, and definitely as most politicians who have done nothing but be in politics all their lives, you are thinking in an entirely different way. You may know the next innovation. You may have an idea or something that we can launch off of as an idea. Give us those ideas. Give our politicians those ideas. Make them public. And if a bunch of people agree with you, let's go with that. Because doing the same thing, which is take away the gun, punish the legal gun owner, it hasn't worked for 40 years. Why do you think it's going to work tomorrow? Does that kind of answer your question, Ava?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I have one last question. First of all, thank you for coming here.
Oh, no problem.
So,
pressure's on, man. Pressure's on.
The founding fathers made it pretty clear that when the government takes away our right to bear arms, it becomes not just our right, but our duty to take away their right to govern. Mm-hmm. If red flag laws aren't that tipping point, then what is that tipping point where it becomes our duty to revolt against tyrants?
That's a really tough question. Wow. I did say give me tough questions, didn't I? Okay. That's something that every individual American has to decide for themselves. I can't say for everyone, this is the line. I've been in the military. I've served. I was a Marine. I've lived over in Moscow. I saw the coup attempt in '91. I've been homeless twice in my life. I now own a business. I own a home. I do okay. So my experiences are very different than yours. My experiences cover half a century. Yours cover, a quarter century. So we're going to have different ways of looking at that, and different things are important. I am a near absolutist when it comes to the First Amendment. I don't believe in hate speech. That's not true. All speech should have other speech. And we shouldn't be afraid of saying words or saying ideas to each other so that we can learn and grow and build. The best way to help change a person's mind isn't to try and beat them over the head with this ideology, but rather to say, okay, here's a conversation. Doesn't it make sense? So for me, there's a different line. I also, having been in the military, having family who's also served in the military, many friends who are in the military, I understand the horrors of war, and war is horrible. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but it is horrible. And to imagine that happening to everyone on a block in a city, just down the street from me, I would never wish that on anyone. It's a horrible kind of thing. So I would want to put that off as far as possible. But maybe that's too long. Maybe it should be done sooner. I don't know. But I can tell you that once, I believe that most people in America understand that we're going in a bad direction. I mean, you can see that in polling, whether it's Rasmussen or others. For many, many years now, America's going in a bad place. We're now hearing people tell us that we have to destroy our police departments. We have to destroy our capitalist society. We have to destroy our electricity that allows us to have a quality of life that is the pinnacle on this planet. We have to destroy ourselves and reset and become something else. And the average person in America, not the people screaming on TV and those political elites, but the average person in America that I talk to, that I hear from, says that's not what they want. at some point, it's going to be too much. That is one of the reasons why we have a Second Amendment. But I always suggest first, but we have an even more immediate way to fix this. I'll tell you right now, term limits. Get rid of everyone in Congress right now. Everyone. Let's start all brand new. Everyone who's in, they no longer can go back in, or anyone who's been under 6 years. Let's call it like that. 6 years is the limit. If you've been in Congress more than 6 years, you can't run again. Get new people in. Make sure that they can only stay in for 6 years. And let's get new ideas. Stop retreading the old ideas. Stop growing the government just to be able to grow the government. Stop taking away my freedoms. We don't have to trade our freedoms just because someone said, aren't you scared? I'm not scared. Not of the thing you're telling me I should be afraid of. I'm scared of what they're doing and what I have seen. You're in college. Many people, if you're not in college, look at a history book. There, it's very clear. This pattern leads down a very similar path that we've seen consistently throughout history, and it's not a good spot it goes to. And if that fails, if voting in new people, in creating new laws, if that doesn't work, we still have options because the Second Amendment is in our favor. And ultimately, the Constitution isn't a restriction on us. It's a restriction on our government. We always have the right to be fairly and freely judged as individuals, not categories, not groups, not genders, not sexual preferences. We are individuals who are free, and we have free choices. Our government is the thing that's restricted. That's what the Constitution is there for. And that means that at the end of the day, we always have a choice. If our politicians realize that we remember that, I think they would act differently. So I know that's not exactly an answer to your question, but it's a question that doesn't have an exact answer, I think. So does that kind of give you a feel for what I'm talking about?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Guys, you guys are great. I love this. And by the way, I normally will talk for hours on end. I do a weekly podcast, and I can talk for 3-4 hours at a time, especially when we're talking about issues like this. You have some great questions that you guys are asking me. And I'm loving to hear that at Rutgers, my old school, and the New Brunswick campus, my old stomping grounds. And it gives me hope for the future. It tells me that it's not quite as bleak because people are thinking and asking questions and paying attention to the details. Look up some of the things that I've talked about. If you think I've ever gotten it wrong, you know what? I invite you every Sunday, come on to the No Soundbites Allowed. Tell me, Mike, you got that wrong. You just misunderstood. I want to know. If you think that I didn't understand you, please, I invite you, contact me. I'm on all social media. Just look me up on the internet. I will be happy to say, okay, tell me why. Because we can't learn, we can't grow, we can't do better if we don't hear what people are saying and going back and going, did I miss that? Is there a better answer? Did I misunderstand? So I do want to mention that to you guys, but I know, Gabriel, it's on you. It's yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vasquez. We truly appreciate all the knowledge you've given us about how gun control and red flag laws can really impact a person's life and in ways that none of us even considered. So thank you so much for displaying all the different nuances to us and for just teaching us so much about this topic.
No problem. I love to have the conversation. I love the interactive part. You should see it when I'm in person. It's way better because I actually walk around and talk to you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine.
Can I ask one question before we go? Just real quick. Sure. Real easy. Show of hands or something like that. Did anyone find out something new? What, you don't have to agree with it or disagree with it, but I just wonder, did anyone find out something new today?
I don't know how to get a hand on this.
Okay. So more than half the people, almost everybody. Then I did my job. That's ultimately what I was hoping to do today, is just give you some new information to think about. So I'm happy.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today.
Oh, very
Great, thank you so much. We'll definitely make plans to have you come to campus, and hopefully by then this corona mess is over and we'll be able to have regularly scheduled in-person meetings. We will make sure to leave out a few slices of disgusting but free pizza for you. So so you understand where I'm coming from there.
Cluck you. I want the Cluck You chicken, and I want the atomic sauce.
I don't think we have.
It's not there anymore.
It's not.
Yeah, we don't.
Specifically, the disgusting pizza, nothing else. That's
Well,
all
the
we
reason
got.
the reason why I say that is because we're only allowed to get food from certain school-approved vendors if we're going to use club funds. And of course, we don't want to use our own money. We would prefer to use club funds. So for that reason, we have to get their pizza vendor, and the pizza place is awful. It's a disgrace to the state of New Jersey, but it's free. So
I understand. It's called, back when in '86, we used to call it the RU screw.
Yeah, that's still a thing today.
That
will always be a thing.
It's happening right now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Tell me about it. My graduation's virtual.
I can feel for you guys. I understand completely. Don't worry. I can tell you from personal experience, lots of challenges ahead, but you're thinking, and if you're thinking, you will do well. Don't even worry about it. Oh, and by the way, please do share this. You're going to see, if you go to No Soundbites, that's with an I, like in the background here, No Soundbites Allowed. The video of everything we said is up now. It was live. There were a bunch of people that were watching it. Share it with people. Let them know about red flag laws in New Jersey and in the nation. And maybe, like Ava had asked, or was it Sarah who had asked, and maybe people will then get to know more about this and then say, hey, we can do better than this.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next year in person.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Guys.
All right. And hello, everybody. Okay. So thank you for joining me as I was speaking to, wow, I'm really big here. All right. There we go. A little bit better. So thank you for joining me as I was speaking with the Rutgers University Young Americans for Liberty, speaking with them about the red flag laws in the state of New Jersey, state of New York, and of course for the United States in total. I see there were many, many comments here, and I'm going to be looking through them. I thank everyone who did stop by to watch this. If you didn't get to see it live, please do leave comments afterwards. Share this with other individuals who may have questions about red flag laws, who don't know exactly what that is, so that we can all have an intelligent conversation about these laws and try and get to something that actually works, to actually increase safety, to help protect us all, if there is something that exists like that, or to address the problems, the root problems that cause mass shootings, school shootings, and gun violence in general. It was a great audience. I was very happy to speak with them. You're a great audience. I'm always happy that you're involved. And folks, I look forward to speaking to you all again very, very soon. Thank you.